Hello,
Yeah, it was good.
that was good, man.
It's good, it's going. So, how is Seattle now? Or how was Seattle? Mm-hmm.
Uh, I'm in Atlanta now.
Yeah. So, what's the difference between going to Seattle from Florida?
What's the difference between my move to Florida
Yeah.
compared to what coming to Atlanta?
Yes. Yes.
When I did that, it was for Microsoft, right? It was basically my first big job in tech, right? So I was working in Florida right after college, moved all the way down to Seattle. Very big change, just the environment's different, the weather. Even just the type of work also different. And then, coming down to Atlanta, I'm fully remote. So technically, my team is in California, but being 100% remote, I can technically be anywhere. So just
Mm.
said, Atlanta was the right place.
So, how do you rate the social life compared to the other two places? That's Seattle, Florida, and Atlanta.
In terms of nightlife, Atlanta is the biggest. It really depends because Florida, there's Miami, which is kind of the turn up
Mm.
capital. But in terms of what I'm very interested in, which is like Afrobeats, Atlanta is kind of like the main hub, and then Florida will come second. Florida being Orlando, Miami, and then Seattle. Seattle, there's Afrobeat scene in Seattle is it's small. I used to be part of the Seattle nightlife, just being a DJ, trying to
Yeah,
curate
yeah,
some
yeah, yeah.
events and just kind of create a vibe. But
DJ
yeah,
Weekend.
definitely Seattle still has a long way to come.
DJ Weekend. Every time I have anybody move to Seattle, I always tell you guys to check out Martin's DJ, the biggest DJ in Seattle. It was so
Yeah,
you guys,
I appreciate the plug
yeah,
and RG.
you and IG. So remember those days where we used to go to every 2 weeks.
Hmm.
Funny because Florida made me like fall in love with Latino music. Where anywhere I go to when I hear Latin music, I always want to dance. Like this reminds me of those days in Florida. But now
Mm,
we are now Afrobeat to the world.
Afrobeat Warriors. Yeah,
Afrobeat to
I
the
feel
world.
like there was a point when we were in Florida, there was a point that like Caribbean music from the best. Like Afrobeats wasn't as popping then, right? And
Yeah.
like my go-to songs were always like soca, dancehall. And
Mm.
then now I can't remember the last time I ever listened to any like Caribbean type song. So definitely Afrobeats has come a lot.
Even remember those days where I was playing all types of music. If you're wondering how do I know these songs? Because I'm deep.
Hmm.
I, s- I know songs. I sabi.
My guy said deep. I'm so dead.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this episode of the podcast. I have Martins with me for this episode. We'll be discussing how software engineering is kind of the most important part of creating tech products. So I'm going to allow him introduce himself formally to us so that we can kickstart this episode. Hello, Martins.
Hey Sharon, thanks for inviting me to this episode. My name is Martins Agbayekhai. I'm a software engineer currently at LinkedIn. Have been working, I guess, 6 years in the industry now since I guess 2013. So I guess this is year seven, right? So I feel like, I've been doing software engineering for a little while now, and hopefully I can share some of my insights across my career today.
So, what did it take you to get to that point? Obviously, you had to go to school, you had to like get experience, but to the point where you, as a software engineer, what were the, I would say, what were the oops, what were the obstacles, what were the certifications you needed to do, and all the experiences that you've had in the past?
I feel like it's a little tricky, and everyone has like their own paths that they take.
Yeah.
So I guess for me
Yeah.
personally, being an international student, the first thing was while in college, trying to pick the right degree. So luckily, since I was a kid, computer engineering just seemed like the right fit. I always felt like I
Mm,
would be able to quickly figure things out, software related
mm,
and even hardware related. So that kind of led me to computer engineering. I didn't even know that the industry was as huge as it was. I just kind of kept hearing about software engineers and I just felt, oh, that's kind of the right fit for me. So going to college, being an international student, it's kind of hard because internships are hard to come by, right? And a lot of time, the career fairs that you go for, they're only looking for citizens, right? Or at
mm.
least it's sponsorship. So that was always the tricky part, I guess, in college because every time I would go for a career fair, I would try and look through the list of companies. So like 50 companies, maybe like four, like
Mm.
sponsored international students, and then it's kind of like all the international students are all trying to compete for those few companies,
It's
right? So that
very
was always
few.
the
Yeah.
exactly. So that was always kind of like the biggest bottleneck, right? So for me personally, I got lucky, right? So the summer before graduation, so the career fair at my college, Florida Tech, then, right, I was able to get an internship with a company. That was kind of how I was able to kickstart my career. So got that first internship and then, got a return offer after graduation. Interesting enough, like as much as I was a student and I was doing computer engineering, it was always like, you have one or two computer classes, you have a bunch of electives. So my internship was kind of the first experience, kind of 20 in quotes,
Mm,
right? Kind of working on code, right?
mm.
And like even longer projects because most times in school, like your projects are like maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or like a term project, but having to work on something continuously from like inception. So that kind of gave me more confidence that I was kind of like in the right path. I was working with, I was there for about 2 years, right? So that was when I ended up leaving Florida and moving to Seattle. And the next company I was with, I was there for about 3 years. And then I made a quick switch to another company for about 10 months. And
Mm.
then I am currently at LinkedIn, where I've been here since July of this year. So a little bit of, job hopping. I feel like for me, I'm a little more adventurous, right? In the sense that like once I find the right next opportunity, I'm eager to kind of take a chance, take a risk. And I know there are a few people that like, oh, you're taking a little too much risk, but that's just kind of like my profile. I just, like to keep it exciting because for me, the worst thing is at a job and it just becomes routine. It's just kind of like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just painful. It's kind of like not a chore and the excitement. I always like to keep it interesting
Keep
and
it
keep
fresh.
learning.
Mm. I mean, you sound
Yeah.
like a typical Gen Z. Gen Zs don't want to stay in one position for more than 1 year. And it's funny because I usually say, okay, 3 years is max for me to stay in a company. I mean, typically. By the third year,
Mm,
I've learned everything I want to learn. By the time people start asking me questions, it means that I've stopped learning and I've plateaued, I've
mm,
gotten to the top. So let's segue into let's just deep dive into our discussion today. Basically, I personally think is the most important aspect of creating products. How do you, how do, say for example, if I have an entrepreneur or I have like a director that has an idea for a particular project or a particular product, how do they converse with you and how do you bring those things to life creatively? Since you have to like sometimes, I mean not most times, but in a situation where you have to start from the scratch all the way building the
mm.
product to the end. So can you take us along that journey?
Yeah. Try and answer to the best I can. So I always have this joke I mentioned. I'm like, oh, if someone is starting a new company, right? Or if you're the CEO, kind of like someone that has an idea, right? Like a startup, who's going to be
Yeah.
your first employee, right? And
Mhm.
the answer is always the software engineer, right? Because you actually need
Yes.
stuff. So
Those
my
things.
PM friends will always argue that, but someone actually has to put on the PM hats, right? And usually it's like kind of like this, like the founder.
Yes.
Right. So it's always interesting, right? Because those two roles I think are critical, but I feel the software engineer is slightly more important. I know
Yeah.
people may
I
find
agree
that
with you.
a little
I agree with
controversial,
you.
but that's
I
kind of
agree
my
with you.
opinion.
I agree
Right.
with you.
So I guess right is as an engineer, you can't just build anything. right? So there has to be kind of like a product slash a direction slash a vision, right? So in the sense, whoever is giving you the requirements, be it the PM or the founder or whoever is putting on that PM hat, has to kind of tell you this is what we're trying to do, right? So they kind of come up with business requirements, right? In the sense that like, I want it to be able to have feature A, feature B, feature C. Also tell us what is the most important, right? So it's up to the engineer to now figure out, okay, they want feature A, B, and C. What technologies am I going to use behind the scenes to power it, right? So now you start thinking of what kind of databases, what kind of services, what kind of architecture, how fast you, and these are conversations that go back and forth, right? So as an engineer, when I get requirements, I have a lot of clarifying questions, right, to make sure I actually get deep down into what the business actually needs, right? So that's kind of how I approach it. Like a lot of times I also challenge PMs or in terms of, sometimes some of the business requirements come in and it's not clear. Yeah, I didn't want to say it didn't make sense. It wasn't clear, and it's just kind of like sometimes you have to, just get them to think about things slightly differently and also understand that like there are some limitations with engineering, right? And there are some things that they may not have thought about, right? That, you can also suggest like, oh, have you considered XYZ? Additional feature would be beneficial. So I think sometimes as a software engineer, I also put on that PM hat to try and even understand, okay, why do they want to? Are there additional things, right? Because the worst thing you want to do is get some requirements, don't ask any questions, you build it, and then the requirement, because it wasn't properly thought out, right? So as an engineer, before you also, and you can also push back, right? There are some things that may come down the pipeline. This doesn't make sense. We shouldn't do this, right? And with everything in the workplace, you must always have like, a good reason, right? So explain your point of view and why, exactly, and why you feel the way you do, and you just have a healthy discussion about it. And if you can see their points as to why it's an important feature, then build it. But I feel like that's kind of how the relationship works. It's more like a partnership, and it's back and forth, just trying to make sure like things are communicated properly. And when the product is ready, right, so also getting feedback like, okay, how does this look? And as much as software engineers, like this kind of a lot of other pieces are falling, like UX designers,
testing,
researchers, right? So
researchers, copywriters,
exactly.
and all that.
Yeah, so all those roles play a little piece into it too.
So my next question is: now somebody has come to you, you already asked questions, you already know what direction I'm going to, but what do you do when those ideas or the products they want to make is not feasible, like it's out of reach? Like I know that for every product everyone wants to create, if there's effort, if there's willingness, you can create those things. But there's some situations where it is not possible. Like someone coming up and saying, I want to build a flying car right now from scratch all the way to the end. Such situations with the entrepreneur or the founder.
Yeah, so a lot of times people don't like to believe things, right? But the truth is sometimes you just don't have the capabilities to do what is asked for, right? So exactly. So you just have to be like, there are some limitations to, let's just say, the platform, because at the end of the day, especially in big companies, right, you don't just create the loan from scratch, right? It's usually part of an existing ecosystem, right? So if that ecosystem has limitations, right, then you have to communicate back that, okay, you want to do this, and technically we should be able to do this, but because of the ecosystem on the platform, or it could even just be resources, right? We just don't have enough time. 6 months to build what you want, but you want it done in 3, right? So you have to communicate back that, okay, this can or cannot be done, and if it can, the reason why. And then it's up to the PM to kind of see, okay, do I need to scope down? Am I asking for too much? Do I need to create like an MVP, kind of like a smaller version? Or do I need to rethink the strategy of what we're trying to do? So it's just more of, being able to effectively communicate that, this is and the reason why. Because I feel like at the end of the day, we're all trying to achieve the same thing. We're all on the same team, right? So it's not kind of like look on, as long as you just communicate that these are the limitations, or this is what we can do or cannot do, right? And then you just go back and forth and just figure out the right
direction to work on. I noticed you mentioning PMs a lot. In the previous two episodes, logically, the previous three episodes, so to speak, logically, what I'm trying to do podcast is to see how the journey is. Say, a founder comes and says, I want to create this. And as you said, we hire product managers. So product managers now communicate those things to software engineers. So it kind of fits into like the way you these things when you're speaking logically fits into what I'm trying to achieve with this podcast for this season. So speaking of which, I've had this issue. I know the difference. I know the differences between these two people, but I want to just shed more light into it because I'm a trained systems engineer. I know how software development lifecycle is. I know what is what and who does what. So just to shed more light, what is the difference between a software engineer and a computer scientist?
Analyst
Computer scientist.
and a computer scientist.
Yes.
That's actually a very tricky question. I think they're the same, right? Because going back into college, right? Going back into college, or a major, computer science and computer engineering. And the way I understood it to be, at least in my college, was computer a mix of computer science and electrical engineering. So essentially, half
software
of my classes were
software engineering,
an electrical engineering.
But I'm saying like software engineering, not computer engineering.
Yeah. So I'll get there.
Okay.
So
okay.
it was kind of like half of my half were electrical engineering. So I dealt with like circuit theory and hardware systems, and also the computer science fundamentals. But after graduation, right, and going into the job markets, you don't have jobs that are titled computer scientists, right? They are all just software engineers. Now, software engineering is a very broad field, right? So you have front end, you have back end, you have data science, which is, you can have some ML engineers that are also engineers. So it's a very broad spectrum. So I think it encompasses everything. So someone that has a computer science degree still ends up being a software engineer because they have computer science degrees. But from what I understood, computer science was meant to be a little more abstract. But coming into the industry setting, I think it's all the same. But I may be wrong, but that's just kind of my understanding of it.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. So what is a typical day for you? I don't want you to talk about the for right now, but I'm saying like in the three companies you've worked, what does a typical day that is like something that's common with those three companies?
So, the life of a software engineer is, I guess I can break it down into half of your day is probably writing code, right? So half of your day, let's just say in an 8-hour work day, is going to be your focus time, right? Actually writing code, depending on your level, right? Because the more senior you get, the more conversations you are in terms of like design, right? I would say another 25% of your time is 25-30%, right? So it could be, team syncs, right? Or it could be design sessions. There are a lot of design sessions that happen because you don't want to just going and building whatever they feel is right? So, you trust your engineers, right? But at the end of the day, you have to ensure uniformity across, and you also have to from other people, right? That way you can kind of see things that you may have missed, right? So there are a lot of design sessions, it being within your small, being within the organization, right? So a lot of times it's also spent, either you presenting your design for review or you reviewing other people's design, right? And then I feel like the last part of your day is probably for like miscellaneous, be it, trying to get some food or even commuting. And I know a lot of people work from home now, so that ratio can kind of change, right? So I feel like that's the kind of typical day, just, getting ready for the day, being a lot of meetings, and then you have your focus time. So your focus time can be spent on different things, right? Doing some research or actually writing or, doing different things. I guess one other thing I could have mentioned is code reviews, right? So apart from the design sessions, when you've actually written the code into the main code base, you actually have to get people to sign up, right? So as an engineer, it's also your duty to do code reviews. And depending on how the companies are structured, you can also conduct interviews, right? Because companies hire a lot, right? So a lot of technical rounds. So I remember one of the companies you had to do 3 interviews every week, right?
Oh,
So every
wow.
interview was like an hour. So I also have to kind of allocate time to do the interview and also write feedback after. And sometimes there may be an actual debrief session if people are on the fence regarding the candidates. So all of these little things kind of take time, which is why I say like it's mostly getting to spend on focus, and the rest is probably meetings and miscellaneous.
Okay, so speaking of coding, what are the tools that would make someone function properly as a software engineer in a tech that want to create products? I know it's huge. There are a lot of tools, but shed more light because I'm familiar with the tools myself, but just for the people listening out there to have more insights.
Yeah, so from my point of view, everyone needs kind of an IDE. So it's a developer environment, right? Where you upload and compile. Regardless of your language, whether it's Python or Java or C Sharp or C++, you have to have a place where you write the code, right? And then, you compile, you deploy it to different environments. So I'll say that's kind of like when I want to actually focus on write code, that's the first thing I open. It may sound funny, but it's actually the internet, be it the local company intranet or the actual internet, because a lot of times, and it's always tricky because like the interviews are sometimes harder than the job itself.
Yes.
There's a problem you've run into before has probably been run into by someone else. You can see, for example, Stack Overflow is one of the good resources where someone has asked a question and the community has been able to answer. So sometimes if you're struggling with, instead of spending like 3 hours trying and hack it together, you could spend a few minutes actually just checking, doing some research, right? So actually find the answer to what you, right? So I feel like those two will probably be, the big two that I would say just, your actual development environment and the internet to be able to find topics or read about stuff. So I would say those two will probably be, and it varies like depending on, if you're like a machine learning person, like you could actually have a lot more tools that you probably need, but it really varies based on your actual role in software.
So for you, what is like the language that you code in?
So my current job is Java. Funny enough, it's the first done Java. And my previous job was Kotlin, and it was the first time I had been Kotlin. But for me, the way I kind of see it is languages are all the same.
Yes.
In a way, right? In the sense that the actual fundamentals of computer science are the same. That's the language you're using. And it's just kind of like there are different syntaxes and different ways to represent the same idea.
Yes.
Right. So one basic computer science way of doing it is more a question of, okay, how do I actually do this in Java? Or how do I do this in C Sharp? Or how do I do this in Kotlin? And that's also comes in, right? Because a lot of times I may have something I know how to do because for the beginning part of my career, I spent like 3, 4 years, 5 years doing C Sharp.
C Sharp, yeah.
Right. So I know C Sharp a lot, right? And there are a couple of things that the language allows you to do. And I'm like, oh, how do you actually have? And I actually do not know. Right. So I actually just go on the internet and just search, okay, how do you do what I'm trying to do in Java? And then I find the solution and then I implement it in my like the internet is very important. But yeah, that's kind of what I use currently. Java and a little bit of Python here, barely.
Yeah, because I'm kind of familiar with coding. I'm currently more proficient. I mean, currently because I can't remember some of those things, but currently I'm more proficient with Python than any other language. And when people ask me that, oh, they want to go into programming, coding, learning how to code, I always tell them that the first thing you need to learn is that having that logical reasoning and breaking the mold on how to program. Once you can learn one language, then you can pick up other languages as fast as possible. So speaking of those things, what questions will be answered by someone you're interviewing that shows the person is proficient?
I guess I can work. I guess interviews, at least software engineering interviews, and what I personally look for. And the truth is, it's standard across the board. So usually the interview is like 45 minutes, right? So I'll just kind of break down the interview process. So it's usually 45 minutes. It's usually like introductions, right? So I tell the candidates a little bit about myself and I hear a little bit about the candidates. Bear in mind that I also have a candidate resume before time, right? So I've already looked it over. But I feel like
Mm,
the beginning 5 minutes helps the person talk, the
mm,
candidate talk. And I feel like you kind of you lose a little bit of the nerves of going to the interview because I know interviews could be very nerve-wracking. But
mm,
when you get the candidate to kind of talk about themselves, everyone knows about themselves, right? It kind of gives them at least 2-3 minutes to talk. And in that time, they're able to kind of calm down a little bit because at the end of the day, you want the candidate to be at their best, right? So you
mm.
want them to be comfortable. And if you can see that a candidate is still nervous, right? You could even crack to liven it up a little bit. But ideally, the first 5 minutes is kind of introductions. I talk about what I work on, the current team, etc. Right. Then the next bulk of our time is 40 minutes, right? So 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how quick the candidate is able to solve the question or questions, is 1 to 2 questions, sometimes 3 questions, right? Which are technical questions. So this is basically now your data structures and algorithms, core
Mm.
data science, not data science, computer science questions, right? So a lot of people that are coming out with software may know about lead code, but basically lead code style questions. So usually 30 to 40 minutes answering that. And then the last couple minutes is spent for like questions that the candidate has, right? So this is the time I feel like a lot of people need to take advantage because that's also the last impression you leave on the interviewer. But it's essentially now you flip the interview and you become the interviewer. And what
Mm-hmm.
company do you want to know about? Because as much as the company is interviewing you, you should also be
Yeah.
interviewing the company. Like, what do you want
Right.
to know about the company
Mm.
that's important to you? Just ask generic questions, right? But I always feel like this is a good piece to kind of ask something that you actually want to know about the company and
Mm.
how it's like, what they etc. Things like day to day and how things work. So it varies, but I would say that's essentially the interview process.
Process. So what makes like what what question would you ask the person? I can understand it's difficult for you to answer. Usually, the interview that you conduct or what software engineers like interview other software engineers for is more on data structures, algorithms and all that. But what question will you ask them for you to say, okay, you're convinced that this person is capable of taking
Mm.
up this role?
So for me, right, the best is you have to pass like some of the questions, right?
Mm.
Because as interviewers, it also varies by company because I've seen this done like now, but there's usually like a rubric, right?
Mm-hmm.
So depending on if the company has like a question bank, right, where these are questions in interviews, then there's a grading scale, and they're like you should only pass the person if they meet X, Y, Z. Let's just say it's 10 points. The candidate
Mm.
has to score 7 points for them to even pass the interview, right?
Mm.
So if the candidate scores 6 points, no matter how good they are. It's a little tricky because that's where it comes to actually you have to really make a case for that candidate that despite they've gone below the company recommended score, you still feel like they're a good fit for the company,
Mm.
right? So it's usually harder to make a case, but usually once you've met the minimum score, right, then you go because these are done at least for when I was last time I was interviewing, you have
Yeah.
2 rounds of coding. So this is called data structures algorithms. You have one round which is kind of like, questions like tell me about the time you had conflict or tell me about your greatest strength,
Right.
greatest
Mm-hmm.
weaknesses, etc.
Star.
Then
Mm-hmm.
you have and then you have one round on kind of like design. So this is more like system design, like design like
Architecture.
a large system. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So those different interviews are looking for different things. So me personally, I interview for the coding component. So I don't ask any behavioral questions. I'm
Mm.
more looking into how confident you are as an engineer, right? How can you solve questions? And I don't expect you to know the answer automatically because that's also a red flag. Because if you've seen a ideally, you're meant to let the interviewer know that you have seen a question. I know a lot of people don't do that. But essentially, right, the idea is a partnership, right, where you are driving the solution, right? But I'm also there to answer questions, right? And if I see a candidate is stuck, I also give hints. So now, unfortunately, if I give too many hints, right, because I don't want to spend 10 minutes of us just looking at each other, right? So I'll give hints to kind of push the interview. But if I give too many hints, it now depends on the level. If you're a senior engineer and I give you way too many hints, that's not a good thing. But if you're a junior
Yeah.
engineer and I give you a little more, okay, that's fine, right? Because
Mm.
we're not expected to operate at a higher level like a senior engineer. So it varies based on the level. But yeah, for me, look at the technical piece, right? And communication is key, right? Because
Yeah.
as much like I said, right, I don't expect you to have the answer. So and how you think about going to the solution, right? Because a lot of times, if we don't have enough time to actually get the full solution out, but you were able to walk me through what you were trying to do, then I can say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, despite the fact that you did not finish the coding, I know that you had the right solution. And more time, you'd have gotten the answer. So sometimes I've passed candidates that did not have enough time to write the code, but we had a good conversation about their solution, where
Mm-hmm.
trade-offs of why this solution is better than alternatives, right?
Mm.
And it was just a matter of coding. And the code I've seen so far has been good, right? So
Mm.
there's no reason, and just because maybe I spent a little too long on the introduction or vice versa, right? So
Mm.
there's a little bit of leeway that interviewers can have. So it really depends. But the first thing I would say is, as a candidate, never dive directly into answering a question. There are always clarifying questions that need to be asked, because for my own personal checklist is, did the candidates ask clarifying questions? If they didn't, then it's kind of like,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So
That makes sense. I'm guessing so far so good. Yeah, the only I think for software engineering it makes sense that the style of interviewing is different from.
yeah,
So my next question would be in terms of intellectual property. So as a software engineer, right, you speak with PMs, you speak with um, the founder, and you come up with a very unique solution to a problem. A situation where you've had to I don't call it patent it, but kind of have like a greater share, or maybe say for example, the person that brought that had the codes for say GT Bank when we were rolling out online banking in Nigeria, which was unique then in 2000, and I think I don't want to say the wrong date, but it was unique then. So how do you ask for more money, or how do you ask for more share or something from the company?
yeah. So I mean, I guess unfortunately, I haven't been in that situation. But the thing is, when you everything you do for the company is for the company, right? So
Mm,
there is no rewards for saying, "Oh, you're doing your job." Right. So now the question is, if you go above and beyond, right? Like you said, you find out like this really creative solution to something, right? So that's the leadership of your organization, right? So your reward could be a single one-time stock allocation. I've seen that happen, right?
mm,
Where essentially someone has gone above and beyond, and maybe it was an out of promotion cycle, because usually promotion is kind of what you would get, right? So,
mm,
of length in time, and you've met other requirements too, right? But sometimes
mm,
they can give you, maybe it's like a $50,000, $100,000 stock award. Now it usually it's over a couple of years, but
mm,
sometimes if you want to retain talent, I've seen those be issued out, right? Those
mm,
one-time stock awards. So
mm.
it really varies, but I feel like that's as far as it goes. Either it would be like a promotion if you've been working towards that, or if it would be kind of like one-time stock award.
Mm. Because I asked that question because of Spotify. Is it Wrapped?
Mm-hmm.
Because I remember seeing a girl's tweet that I think she was an intern with them, and she came up with that idea
Yeah,
and wrote
I
it.
saw
Because
that.
so that kind of situation is very different because it's not what the company like it's not what Spotify does normally, but it kind of gives them more marketing and more visibility and
Mm-hmm.
more ownership by people, more members, or what's it called? So more
Yes, there's more
subscribers,
engagement. Yeah.
there's more engagement. So it's kind of regular, oh, I just went above and beyond. That is creating something definitely unique that
Like a new product.
other companies, other software companies are kind of copying. For example, I got something from Uber telling me my year in review. I got something
Oh
from
yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of situation is different from going above and beyond. So what do you think about that? What's your take on that?
So yeah, I remember Spotify Rap being an intern project. And I'm like, oh,
Yes.
that's cool. But the thing, right, is like I kind of explained earlier while we're talking is no idea just comes directly from the software engineer. Maybe in this case it did, right? But usually like intern projects would always come from like either from the PM side or from the engineering manager side, right? Okay, this is the right intern projects for you, right? So she or he, I don't know if it was a girl or a guy, but the person basically did not come up with the idea themselves, and at least they worked on it entirely by themselves, right? They must have gotten some ideas or some information from other people,
Mm.
right? So in that kind of situation,
Allegedly, because you don't know, allegedly.
yeah, allegedly,
Mm.
right? So in that kind of situation, right, it's kind of tricky because it's an intern project, right? And it was successful, right? So usually you get a return offer, right? At least from all the interns I've seen, successfully complete your intern project, most likely you would get a return offer if the company is hiring. So
Mm.
technically there was a reward already given for the now it
Mm.
obviously blew up more than they probably thought it would,
Yes.
right? But I don't know if there should be any additional compensation because the person was acting under the umbrella of the company, right? So it's kind of like you can't expect to compensate for every single great idea that comes up.
But that was a
It's
very
my
great
it's my
idea.
own point of in my own point of view,
I
right?
get, but it's like also my idea, like huge, like it's different from ideas that come around.
Yeah, it's definitely unique, right? But it's one of those things that like precedents, right? I don't really see companies paying out for every single good idea that comes up.
Mm, that makes sense because I was just wondering because I kind of understand, I kind of empathize, and I kind of understand where she's coming from because it's
So I mean, I didn't really see that tweet, but what was the person? Was the person asking for compensation?
I can't remember fully, but I kind of felt she felt slighted. She felt like she didn't get what was due her. I
Maybe
because
she didn't get credits.
yes, she didn't get credit. If she got a return offer, then I don't think she would have had an issue with them not, acknowledging her.
Yeah.
But
Okay. So I just quickly looked it up because I was actually very curious. So
yeah.
Spotify Wrapped actually existed, right? But it was an email that was sent, right?
Oh,
And essentially, the intern turned it from an email
to
to
UIX. Oh,
so like I'm looking at the email, like the UI looks exactly the same, right? So it's more kind
mm,
of like taking that information size into kind of a
mm,
stories concept. So I didn't obviously read the full thing, right? But I just looked at it, right, just quickly, and that was the
mm.
story concept, just making like stories, and I'm guessing being able to share to other social platforms
Yes,
was
yes,
essentially the intern project.
yes.
Is except we actually worked in Spotify or we're actually involved in that project, we'll never really know the full
Full story.
full story. But I feel like projects have been very successful across, right? And I don't think everyone gets, the credit because at the end of the day, there are employees that do things that are rock stars, they are rock stars, right? And you don't really see their name in the news, right? For example, if you think of, let's just use Microsoft, right? Teams, right? I'm sure
Mm,
people that created Teams, the founding team of Teams, do you know
mm.
any of them? No,
No.
right? So even is it Facebook stories or all those different concepts that are kind of copied?
I
You
mean,
don't really know the teams behind.
they stole it
Yeah.
from Snapchat. They stole it from Snapchat.
Snapchat. But even the
Yeah,
Snapchat engineers, all you know is the CEOs, right? You
yeah.
actually know the engineers that actually built it. So as much as I sympathize and maybe we don't really know what truly happened to her, maybe if I read more, I can kind of see what truly happened to the girl, right? But at the end of the day, everything is the company umbrella, right?
Mm,
So I don't see how they would, give individual rewards because there is some kind of mechanism that they have in place because when this person right is looking for a full-time job, once you show them you made Spotify Wrapped and you've seen how it has blown,
that's enough. Like,
there's no
yeah,
reason
it's in
why they
get
will
job.
not give you a return offer, right?
Yeah.
So
Okay. So the final question for this episode, I've been asking everybody so far. I need to ask you to explain what you do to a 7-year-old.
So a 7-year-old.
Yes.
Not actually. So, I think of a 7-year-old trying to explain this too. Essentially, what I do is I write code that makes things happen. I don't even know if that's a good answer, but yeah, that's as simple as I can. I write code to make things happen because it being just software itself, or even like hardware, like a lot of hardware runs on code too, right? So yeah, I make code too. I write code to make things happen. I know it doesn't really explain much, but I can't really think of the better way to kind of say.
You are definitely not winning the prize that I want to give to the person that because my plan is I'm going to take at least maybe like 5, 7 year olds and play this part of each episode to them to the 7 year old to see, okay, which of you understands what this person grade all of you. I have prize
Okay,
waiting.
I guess if I was to take another stab, so let me try and win. Let me make it more serious. So writing code is writing it to a machine, and the machine does what you want it to do. Right. So, for example, if you decide you write code to make a game, right, and the game is a very simple simulation where the car just drives. Write code that says turn left, and the car turns left. Turn right, it turns right. Right. Reverse, and it reverses. I think that's just writing code that you send the commands to the machine and it does exactly what you want it to do.
Okay. It's because I'm also a software person. I'm just add small to it, the set of instructions that makes things happen. Anyways, yeah. Well, we've come to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for your time. So now, are you fully based in Atlanta, or you want to run away from Atlanta?
I mean, for now, I'm in Atlanta. Let me put it that way. Who knows where I'll be next year? But as of the next few, I'm in Atlanta. That's home right now.
As a typical Gen Z now, say for now, because
why do you keep saying Gen Z at the beginning? I'm not Gen
you don't
Z.
need to. Yeah, Gen Z.
Relax.
Yeah, Gen Z. Anyways, thanks for showing up.
Oh yeah, thank you for the invite. This was fun.
Yeah, it was fun. Hopefully, I think for the next season, I might need you to come back because I have some follow-up questions. I'm sure people have a lot of questions because we said a lot of things. So, well, thank you very much for your time.
Sounds good. I'll be a little more prepared next time for your final questions.
Well, we'll see about that. All right. Thanks. Yeah, have a good one.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, bye.